You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Now, there is a rumor that something really regrettable and disappointing happened the other night in Northeast Ohio. And we're not going to talk about that. Not even one little bit. Not going to spend any time talking about that, even though I know the pain is real. I know it hurts. I know it hurts. Instead, we're going to talk about some positive things, but I'm going to need your help. So what I want to do is talk about 5 positive things that we could focus on in the summer aside from basketball, because we're probably not going to be playing basketball in the summer anytime soon. We're not going to talk about any more than that. So give me 5 things that are positive we can focus on in the summer. No snow. What else? What's that? The Indians. They got to pick it up a little bit. Sunshine. Loving the sunshine, even though it's not out today. We're going to love the sunshine. 2 more. Swimming. And church picnics. Swimming at church picnics. That's 1. We got one more. Ice cream. Not on the ice cream truck. The people will rob you. Stay away from the ice cream truck. I want to get an ice cream bicycle. Let's work this out. Ice cream bicycle. We got to work on this, okay? Ice cream bicycle. So yes, summer is a great time to focus on things like swimming, at the church picnic, ice cream, not on the ice cream truck, no snow, sunshine, baseball, all that great stuff in the summertime. It's also a time where church starts to slow down a little bit, but we get to focus on relationships and friendships. In the summertime, you see church attendance starts to decline a little bit. And you can kind of see we're kind of in the middle of that right now. So we spend time doing things like getting together and hanging out with family and going to the beach and going to the ballpark and going camping and sleeping in and all the great stuff that summer demands. You have to do that in the summer because we know the weather is terrible 9 months out of the year. So it's just part of the expectation. This is what happens in America and the church because there's more things to do. There's more daylight hours. There's no school. So we occupy ourselves and our time with all the great things of summer, and so we don't hang around the church as much. It's what happens. But once fall hits and school starts to go again and the routines pick up, we sort of all come back together, and we come back ready, and we start inviting people, and things start to take off. This is just a pattern of church in America. It's what happens. So the question is, what do we do during the summer? Well, we enjoy each other, right? Can we enjoy each other? We like to enjoy each other. We enjoy the deepening relationships and the fun stuff we can only do during the summer, but we also prepare our hearts so we can grow right here, improve right here, so when the time comes, we can do what? Grow out there and influence the world out there. So this is our aim for the summer, to prepare ourselves for this new journey God is taking us on as he moves us to a new home in September, and we're super excited about that. We have all sorts of challenges, but there's all sorts of adventures. It's going to be a wonderful adventure, a great time, great journey, new chapter. Awesome. Now, one of the most common things that we focus on when we talk about summer, one of the most common summer activities is summer vacation. Anybody here ever been on summer vacation before? Okay, summer vacation. We've done it before. So, not everyone gets to go on vacation every single year. But summer is a time when we can get away if we're able to. Sometimes it's good to get away from everything, right? Just get away from everything, right? You got to get away. Sometimes it's good to experience new sights and sounds. It's always good to experience new food. Like when I think about going somewhere, the first thing I have, what kind of restaurants they got? What kind of food they got? I don't think you can go on vacation without gaining like 10 pounds, at least. 10 pounds, at least 10 pounds. So new food, new faces, new scenery. And it's always good to spend money on those souvenirs that are total junk. Anybody ever been to Niagara Falls before? How about Times Square? And you bought the souvenir, right? Little Statue of Liberty, little Niagara Falls thing, little keychain. How long did it take before it was broken? 27 minutes, right? 27 minutes. But you still got to buy it anyways. You got to buy the souvenirs. You also have to take the pictures, right? In front of the really important landmarks, like the world's biggest ball of yarn. Have to do it. Super important. So vacation is really, 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 really important if you can do it. And some people go every single year. But the thing I find really interesting is no matter how many vacations you go on, or no matter where you go, you always come back home 100% of the time saying the same thing when you walk in the front door inside on your couch. What do you say? I'm glad to be home. I'm glad to be home. Because as much as we love going away, we like home more. Because home is where family and friends are. Home is where your favorite chair is, right? Home is where you know all the back roads. You don't have to take out your GPS. You know what I'm saying? Home is where you know where to get the cheapest groceries. You know, when you go on vacation, you're going to go to that grocery store that charges you like $37 for like a gallon of milk. When you're home, you know where Aldi's is at. You know what I'm saying? You know where to go. When you're home, you know how to avoid the toll roads. When you're home, you know where the state highway patrol guy is always set up at what time of day, right? Still salty about that speeding ticket I got 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. I'm a man of God, man. I wasn't speeding. All right. So we all love home, which is why I was speeding 20 over. Man, come on. First ticket since 1999. Give me a break, man. We all love home, which is why it's so troubling that the Bible calls all of us exiles. In the Bible, it says all of us are foreigners and strangers in this world. To be an exile means that you are removed from your home, and most of the time, against your will. This is one of the major themes in the Bible. And when the Bible speaks about exile, it can be talking about one of two types of exile. First, spiritual exile. Second, spatial exile. Spiritual or spatial. In other words, exile is either a heart issue that removes us from the will of God, or a location issue that removes us from a physical space that we want to occupy. So exile is a major theme in the Bible from cover to cover, and we see it in three major periods. The first period of exile is all the way back in the book of Genesis, as Bill said earlier. It's all the way back in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 3. If you don't know where Genesis chapter 3 is, just go ahead and open your Bible to the first page and flip the page. There it is. That's Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, it talks about Adam and Eve and God giving them a home that is perfect. There's no pain, no sorrow, no death, no disease. They have one job. Anybody know what their job was? Have babies. Have babies and have dominion over creation. That was sort of what they had to do. They also only had one rule. What was the rule? Come on, speak it up. What's the rule? Don't eat the fruit. Stay away from that tree. Just do anything you want, please. Just stay away from that tree. Now, they had to have this rule. Had to have this rule. Why? Because God had to give them a way out if they wanted one. Look, love doesn't force people into anything. So if God says he creates these people he loves, he's got to give them a way out. If God loved them, he had to give them the opportunity to say no to him. And that's what they did. They ate from the tree, they ate the fruit, saying to God, we don't trust you as a parent, God. We don't really need you. In fact, we can make our own decisions. We got this. So they were exiled from the garden. That's the first exile. God gave them a purpose, which they broke, and they were exiled. This is spiritual and spatial exile. They are not only exiled from a physical place, there's now a fractured relationship between them and God. God set a boundary, and they broke the boundary. And so now they have to live in the consequences of this broken boundary. And if you've ever had a relationship that's gone wrong before, if you've ever had a relationship that's hit a rough patch, you know what this looks like. When a relationship boundary is broken, sometimes you just need some space. You got to sort of get away from each other with the hopes that you'll come back together and things will be okay, but sometimes you just got to get away. Sometimes it's necessary to establish a boundary, and that's what God did by removing Adam and Eve from the garden. This was the first exile, but it was a big one. It's a big, big, important thing. Bad news, because we still feel the consequences of that exile today. I think we would all agree, especially if you've been on planet Earth more than 14 or 15 years, that there is this universal sense of loneliness or alienation that people have. I could go to the mall and I could ask 100 people if they felt like something was missing from their life. I could ask 100 people if they felt like something wasn't quite right with the world, and I guarantee you 99 people would say, yeah, something's up. There's always that one person, like that one 13-year-old boy, is like, nah, everything's fine, it's cool. Like, this would be countercultural, but everybody else would say, yeah, something's wrong. I don't quite understand why things are the way they are. I've been searching for something, but I'm not satisfied. I've been reaching for something, and I can't quite find it. It's sort of like an itch that you can't scratch. Like, when you need someone else to get it for you, like, hey, come here, get that a little lower to the left, you know what I'm talking about? Or a thirst that you can't quite quench, right? And I think that we would all agree that the pain, the broken relationships, the death, destruction, disease, and tragedy in the world is not right. It's not what was intended. That can't be what we were made for. There's this feeling among all of us, a feeling of displacement and alienation, a sense that something isn't quite right. And I hear this all the time when I talk to people about religion. People will say, I don't know what's out there, I don't know what's missing, but something's missing. Something isn't quite right. I need to find out who I am, I need to find out my purpose, I feel like I keep searching, I don't know what I'm here for, but I am confused. I've tried things before, and it's not working. What they are describing is a feeling of exile. A feeling of exile because we're all living in the consequence of telling God that we want nothing to do with him. So in that first episode of exile, all the way back in Genesis 3, we're still influenced by that. We're still influenced by the brokenness, and we feel it today. All that sadness and brokenness you see around us is all evidence of exile. The second episode of exile is one that we've been talking about, you're familiar with. We've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. It's that period between 607 and 538 BC where the Hebrews or Jews or the Israelites were exiled from Jerusalem. They were taken to Babylon, and we know the story by now. Babylon came in, they leveled everything, they destroyed the temple, they took the Ark of the Covenant, and all the people were moved into Babylon. Why are they exiled from Jerusalem? Because God gave them a place to call home, but he also gave them just one job. One job. Show the world my goodness. Bring the nations back to me. And much like they did in Genesis, they had one job, but the people didn't live up to their end of the bargain. So instead of people bringing the nations back to God, they scorned the nations, and they became prideful, and they became self-righteous, and they did a very poor job of representing God. And the exile is the result. So this is spiritual exile. It's also spatial exile. They were outside the will of God, and they had to move away from that place that they loved. This exile was once again initiated by God, but there was purpose behind it. Just after those 40,000 Jews were deported to Babylon, God told them, you'll see it here, we've talked about it for the past couple weeks, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number, do not decrease. Also, seek the prosperity and the peace of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. God says, I wanted you to make a difference in the world, but you didn't. So I had to move you into the world. I wanted you to go out and reveal me to all those people out there walking around in loneliness and alienation. I wanted you to reveal me to all those people feeling displaced. I wanted you to go find all those people who couldn't figure it out. The people who didn't know the way, and I wanted you to show them the way back to me. I wanted you to show those exiles the way home. So in these two periods of exile, the exile out of the garden and the exile out of Jerusalem, you see two common themes. Each time, the exile is initiated by who? By God, according to our choice. God exiles us based on our choices. Adam and Eve are exiled because they don't trust God and they want to be independent. Okay, you got to go. The Jews were exiled from Jerusalem because they were supposed to influence other people. They were supposed to bring the nations back to God, but instead they became self-righteous jerks. So God exiles humans based on human choices. But each period of exile is also redemptive. It's also restorative. Adam and Eve were exiled from the garden, but they left in hope that they could find their way back to God. The Jews were exiled into Babylon with a task, but also a promise. Influence the world. I'm moving you out there to influence the world, but you're going to come back. In 70 years, you're going to come back. Now, as I read this, one thing that sticks out clearly is God is always willing to move you with intent. God is willing to move you with intent to the place he wants you to go. Let's keep this in mind as we study the third period of exile that we find when we open up the New Testament into the book of Acts. As we read the book of Acts, the church is literally only a few days old. Jesus has risen from the dead. He returns to heaven. But before he goes to heaven, he says, look, I'm going, but you got one job. One job. And specifically, he tells them, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you to the very end of the age. He tells them to go. Now, when someone tells you to go, what is your general response? You got to go, especially if it's your wife. Go get me some ice water. Can you run to the store? Can you go over to Target and grab some stuff? Like, you got to go, right? Now, my wife is shaking her head because I get a little defiant. I'm like, you ain't going to tell me what to do. I'll sit there for like 10 minutes, and I'll start to think about the consequences of not going. And then I'm like, hey, I got to run to Target. I got to go. But generally, when people ask us to go, we move from where we are to someplace else. And Jesus said very specifically, go make disciples of all nations. That means everyone. Nations means every place ever. Now, because we're sort of slow to understand sometimes, he gets real specific. Later on, he says specifically, go to Jerusalem. Go to Judea. Go to Samaria. And go to the ends of the earth. He covers all the bases because Jerusalem's like staying local, like go around your little neighborhood. And then Judea is like it's a little bigger. It's like sort of like in the, go around your like, little, like your county. And then Samaria is like go over to the next state. And then he says go to the ends of the earth. So he's got like all the bases covered. Even for like the flat earth people, he gets real specific. Just go everywhere. The thing is, the early church didn't really do that. They didn't really go anywhere else except Jerusalem. They sort of stayed where they were at. And I mean, some great things were happening, and Bill read the text earlier. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who was in need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, going to church every day, even in the summer. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And what happened? The Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I love this passage. This passage, more than any other, was responsible for me becoming a pastor. I heard this passage when I was 23 years old in Chicago. I'm like, heck yeah, I'm a pastor. I want this to happen. There's miracles are happening, and they're sharing, and they're studying, and they're eating potlucks every day. Impacting the community together, playing flag football, I'm sure. But it was one church. And it was in Jerusalem. And they had a whole world to reach. And they weren't going into Judea. They weren't going into Samaria. They weren't going to the ends of the earth. They were staying local. And guess what? They were all Jewish. So that means they're all one race, the same skin color. They had the same background. So this church was thriving, and you see them doing some great things for several chapters in the book of Acts. But they weren't doing exactly what Jesus had intended. He said, go, and here's where you got to go. And they were just kind of staying, doing good things, but they were staying. So in Acts chapter 8, verse 1, it says, on that day a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. It's another exile. The third period of exile we see in the scriptures. Genesis 1, they were exiled from the garden. Genesis 29, they were exiled to Babylon. Now, Acts 8, they're exiled out of Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria, which is the exact place that Jesus told them to go. So clearly, just like before, the exile was initiated by God, and he would even exile Bill because Bill just said that was a perfect church. It was an exile initiated by God. And the exile was more spiritual or more spatial than spiritual because their hearts were right. They were doing good, but they had to move. So God moved them from where they were to where he wanted them to go with intention. And now the church was in Judea, and now the church was in Samaria, and soon Greece, and soon Rome, and soon Europe, and Rome is in Europe, and then Africa, and soon to the ends of the earth. Just like Jesus had asked them to do. And they moved because God took them from where they wanted to stay and moved them to where he wanted them to go. Now, I think this theme of exile can be confusing depending on our view of God. Because I think that people just tend to see God in extremes. Either, and some people have felt this way before, I think I felt this way before, that we think God is mean and he's demanding and he insists that we follow rules as it means to relate to him. We think God is unapproachable. Or we see God as so full of grace and mercy that he doesn't care what the heck we do at all. These are extremes. But I think that if we see God as mean and demanding and harsh, then the exile stuff really kind of fits right into that perspective because we say, look, God disrupts people. He moves them into places they don't want to be. He brings discomfort and trial just so he could have his way. And this seems sort of self-focused, doesn't it? If we were in a relationship with someone like that, we'd probably insist that they get some counseling or something, you know. You better go talk to someone. You're selfish. On the other hand, if we see God as so full of love and so full of mercy that he doesn't care what we do, then this gets real confusing. Because God is clearly moving people out of their comfort zone with intention. I want to give a different view. Let's look at this through a different lens. What if we saw the exiles in the Bible through the lens of grace? And I'm not talking about cheap, anything goes, God is my puppet grace. I'm talking about a grace that says you have to leave the garden because of the choice that you made. But I have a plan to restore you. And until that day, I will never stop walking beside you. I'm talking about a grace that says, I love you, and that's why I've given you a home in Jerusalem. But I love the rest of the world too. And I want the rest of the world to experience the joy and love and hope of knowing me. So I'm sending you to them so they can experience the joy and the hope of knowing me. And you can experience the joy of telling them. I'm talking about a grace that says to the early church, hey, good job. You are almost, like Bill said, perfect. Almost. You are growing. Miracles are happening. You're eating together. You're worshiping together. You are studying together, but I want my church in Judea and Samaria and into the ends of the earth. So you got to go. When we look at the exile through the lens of grace, we don't see God as mean or vindictive or self-focused. We see a God of grace and love that loves the world enough to extend his grace everywhere and loves us enough to ask you and you and you and me to participate in the process. He's willing to move us. He's willing to disrupt us for the benefit of the world, knowing that as the world changes, we will benefit from being initiators of change. This blows my mind. Just try to sit and think about this. Think about this. Understand that God does not need us, right? God doesn't need me to do what he wants to do. Doesn't need even one little sermon. Doesn't need me to pray over dinner. Doesn't need me to say amen. Doesn't need me even one little bit. Doesn't need you either. Oh, that's harsh. Well, no, because he wants you. He doesn't need you, he doesn't need me, and yet still wants you and wants me. Wants me, wants you, and chooses me and chooses you to participate in his work. Going to great lengths to make sure we participate in his work because he knows the joy that we get from participating will be the greatest joy of our lives. Understand, he calls us to bless the world with the knowledge of Jesus, and as they are blessed, we are blessed. There is nothing greater than knowing Christ. There is nothing greater than telling others about the love of Christ. So God will move us with the intention that we can share the best news that the world has ever heard. And that's the best news for us. Understand? Now understand this. We are still that exiled church. We are still tasked to go and make disciples. The command hasn't expired. There's 90,000 people within 10 square miles of this building. 25% of Americans claim to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm not good at the maths, but there's a lot of people who don't know Jesus in 10 square miles. The command hasn't expired. So we are in spatial exile because what we long for is to be in a world where there is no more pain or brokenness or evil or tears or anger or tragedy, and that day will come. Jesus is bringing heaven to earth. That garden is coming back. Perfect cities are on the horizon, and it says in the last page of your Bible, open up to the last page and flip the page. It says the exile will come to an end. It says, I heard a loud voice coming from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell among them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Do you want that? There will be no more pain, no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, for the old order of things has passed away. Listen, he who was seated on the throne, and this is Jesus, listen to what he says. He says, behold, I am making all things new. And he's not talking about this ethereal place in the sky where we staple on some wings and we go flying around playing the harp. He's talking about bringing heaven to earth. All the beauty of creation, restored relationships, peace, hope, everything that is good and glorious to earth and restoring all of it. And we are in relationship with God, in perfect relationship with one another, always. That's what's ahead of us. So all of us who know Jesus, that's what we're looking forward to. We are longing for that place, and we're going to find it. We will be home soon. But until then, we are in search of those who don't know Jesus yet. We are in search of the people who've not yet been restored back to God. People who are walking around longing to be connected with their Creator and don't even know it. All those people walking around in loneliness and alienation. The people who've been sensing that there's something more but haven't quite found it. People like we used to be, living in the midst of pain and broken relationships and death and destruction and disease and tragedy. And they know, just as we did, there has to be something more. Do you remember being here? Do you remember being in that place? I sure do. I remember feeling unlovable, unloved. I remember feeling like my sins were too great. I remember wondering what I had to do to make up for all the things I had done wrong, because there was a list. There was a whole list, and there was a whole list of people who would tell you about it if you asked them. I remember wondering if I could ever know enough or change enough to impress God. I also remember how great it felt to know that He loved me. I remember the moment. I remember just opening up my heart and saying, Jesus, come in, please, I need you. I don't know much about you, but I know I need you. I remember asking Him, come into my life, change whatever piece you can. And I remember the freedom of being forgiven, the freedom of shedding my past, the joy of knowing that He took me as He found me, but He wouldn't leave me as He found me. I remember being an exile who found home. The truth is, I'm still in exile. I know He's coming to fix all of this. I know He's coming to make all of this new. I know He's coming to complete and restore everything that is broken. So I'm not home yet. But I know where home is. I know where home is. And while I'm waiting for it, I'm going to use all my passion and all my heart. And I know we're going to do this together. We are going to use our collective passion in all of our hearts as exiles, leading other exiles back home. And I know that this is why we're moving. I know this is why we're moving. I know this is why He's displacing us with intent. Because He's putting us in a position where we will do His work in a way that no one has ever seen before. I know it sounds spiritual and I'm supposed to be spiritual, but I believe that miracles will happen when people who give their passion and their heart for Christ go all in and they do it together. Miracles will happen and people will proclaim the name of Jesus, and they've maybe never believed it for, but they will believe it in that moment because they'll see it in us. They'll see heaven touching down through our work and our devotion. And I believe that God is putting us in a position where we are going to point people to Jesus, and they are going to discover the home that they've always been looking for. I believe that He's chosen us as exiles to love other exiles. Exiles to love other exiles, so we can say to them, oh, so you're a user. You're an addict. You've made choices that neglect the people that you love. You've made choices to neglect your family and your friends. Yeah, I've done that too. But come on, let me show you what home looks like. So you had an abortion when you were 15 years old. You live with guilt for 15 years. You haven't been able to forgive yourself. Yeah, I did that too. I did that too. Let me show you what home looks like. Let me show you a Jesus who puts all the broken pieces back together. And maybe you've been a victim of racism, or people look down on you because of your gender. I felt that too. Let me show you what unity looks like. Let me show you the Jesus who's broken down the dividing wall of hostility. You've been abused, assaulted, taken advantage of. Me too. And I can't take the pain away, but I can show you a Jesus who can take the shame away. A Jesus who can show you how to start healing. And see, when we have the honor and privilege of being called to change people's lives, that is a gift given to us by God. And there's someone who's sitting in their living room right now. Someone who's sitting in their car and they're watching the rain fall on their windshield. They're hearing the birds chirp outside. But they are feeling lonely and hopeless and alienated. And they've totally given up. And they don't know it. But God has set you aside. He's called you to change their life by leading them to Jesus. So don't ever think what's happening here is common or coincidental. You are in this place, in this space of history, according to His design and according to His plan and according to His will, so that you can impact someone's eternity. Think of the honor in that. As imperfect as we are, He has asked us to influence the outcome of people's lives. He's asked Crystal to show people what mercy is. He's asked Andrea to show people what hope is. He's asked Dina to show people what redemption is. He's asked Aaron and Autumn to show people what worship is. He's asked Mike and Crystal to show people what generosity is. He's asked Jared to show people what steadfastness is. He's chosen all of us to bring all of heaven to earth as exiles, leading other exiles back home.